8 and 9 went through some Old Testament sections talking about Christian giving, went through the principles of Christian giving that we gleaned out of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And we're concluding this course today by having Ryan Schmeling as our guest. Ryan is Mission Advancement Director at Evergreen and also teaches a course called Financial Literacy. So I thought we'd invite him for a couple of reasons, to do some of the practical side of what does it mean to budget so we're in a position so we can give. And then also because he teaches this course at Evergreen, it's nice for you to see a little bit, what are we teaching our young people when it comes to finance, budgeting, giving, these types of things. So maybe you can welcome Ryan with some applause. Let's welcome Ryan. That's all you, Ryan. Thank you.
The applause comes before you actually hear anything. That's always a good way to start. So I am Ryan Schmeling. I'm the Director of Mission Advancement at Evergreen. And a couple of different things maybe about me before we kind of go into the other part. One of the things that I do at Evergreen works on the bottom, working with estate planning, charitable donations, different things along those lines. The slide above, or the bullet point above that is I teach a financial literacy class to juniors and seniors. We talk about a number of different topics inside that class, anything from having a checking account versus savings account, how to write checks, debt, credit cards, process of buying a house, investing, lots of different things along those lines. As I look, I see PJ in the back. He took my class last year? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So we might be able to look to him to answer some questions along the way. Or he might have to keep me in check on making sure I'm telling the truth about my class or something too. Okay? So that's a little bit about me, some of the different jobs or things I've got to be part of in the past, or maybe job offers I've maybe had in the past. Anywhere from working with financial advising, anything with like Thrivent and charitable giving through them. At one point there was a job offer to be the apprentice to take over the position of the president of Primerica. And so there's a number of different things that just dabbling here and there to be able to put together just an interest of how we manage our money. In the end, God gives us something. Every year, we have an income that comes in. Over the course of time, that adds up to a lot. How comfortable, how confident do we feel in what God gives us and what we're doing with it? So as we go into the next slide, this is kind of the overview of what I basically based this presentation off of. The idea of talking about giving. I know that's something that in your Bible classes you've been going through already. And so we're going to touch on some of that. And then the next two parts is useful budgeting tools, and then the last one is financial tips for building confidence in the gifts and the blessings that God has given to us. So that's kind of the direction that I want us to think about. One of the things before we actually hit on this point is I think it's awesome the fact that your church is actually talking about stewardship. Because I think if the church is not the place where we're going to learn about how to manage our money, who are we leaving that up to? Just so you know, this is going to get a lot more discussion based as we go. So feel free to just throw out answers. If we don't talk about this in the church, where are we leaving our understanding of money and managing money up to? Ourselves, right? The society that we live in. Is that a good way to start building on how we manage our money? Not at all. So, an encouragement, a support, a congratulations to your church, your pastors, your council for actually having stewardship being something that you focus on for a number of weeks, a number of months to be able to have this be part of your conversation. So one of the things that I want to just ask you as you've been going through charitable giving, or as far as giving and stewardship the last couple months, what have been some of your biggest takeaways through those Bible classes? Name one or two things that, this is something that really stuck out to me, or something that is just really good to be reminded of. Give cheerfully. Holy smokes, we're going to hit on that a lot. The idea of giving cheerfully. Because you know what? If I'm not going to give cheerfully, should I give it all? Okay, that's a question. How about this? What if I'm cheap? If I'm cheap and I don't want to give, then should I not give at all? Does that make it good? Does that make it okay? There's a number of different things that when it comes to giving and when it comes to even personal finances, attitude is one of the big things that we're going to be focusing and circling around is what is our attitude or our approach to our personal finances as well as our giving. Other takeaways? Yeah. Sure. That idea of giving being part of worship. But if you stop and you think about it, when we actually think of how the let's call it the old church, back in the Bible times when they talked about the temple, there's very few things that they talk about when it comes to the temple other than giving. Giving is one of the biggest things that they talk about, coming and giving burnt offerings and mostly everything in the Bible that we hear about when it comes to the Bible times of the temple was about giving. And I think in a way, we've kind of veered from that being a huge part to what we're doing. Absolutely. What else? Other takeaways? Maybe if it's not something that stuck out to you in the Bible studies themselves, what would you say off the top of your head is some of the most important things to think about when giving? Yeah, know why. Have your reason why. If we don't know our why, then there's no reason to do it. I think of it kind of like law and gospel, right? If we don't know why we're sinners, then we don't need to care about why we need a Savior. So knowing our why. Good. What else? Yep. Yeah. Being intentional, right? Being intentional with our money and then planning in a way that allows us to be cheerful when we're actually giving. A big part that I think that we should also think about is making sure that we don't have our giving be considered a bill. That it's not transactional, that it's not, especially when we go into day and age now where a lot of giving has turned into online giving. How can we make sure that our online giving still maintains a cheerful heart giving versus this is now an expense? It's an important part. Good. Anything else? Yeah, that's a big part too right now, remembering that everything we have comes from God. I think sometimes we use that rule of thumb 10%, and I think sometimes we say to ourselves 10% is a lot. 10% is too much. But on the flip side, we're leaving 90% for ourselves, and we think that's too little. So that idea, again, it's attitude, it's approach of how we're thinking of money and how we're approaching that. Good. Yep. Absolutely. Well, and I think sometimes, and we're going to touch on that more too. So if I don't go too deep into it, that idea of do we give based on our feelings or do we give to God? Because sometimes when you're giving to a place, if you disagree with a certain one or two or three things that they're working on at the time, do you stop your giving? Was your giving really for the item, or was your giving supposed to be a relationship that you have with you and God? Again, all these things and these attitudes and things that we think about when it comes to our giving. So let's go on to the next part. On to the next part here. So what are some of the excuses or reasons that we might give for not giving? Yep, our ability to do it, right? So now, as we think of some of these reasons, play devil's advocate a little bit too. What would you respond to any of the reasons that we name for excuses? So if someone were to say, money's tight right now, what would devil's advocate to that be? Devil's advocate to, well, money's tight right now, my ability to give has gone down, therefore, I can't. What's devil's advocate for that? Okay, God provides. Was there something that I could have done to prevent this? Was it a lack of planning on my part? Maybe this time that situation is there, but is this something I can prevent later on from happening again? If it happens once, sometimes if that happens once, it's a two or more is a habit is where I'm going with this. But if it happens once, it's an emergency or it's an accident. If it happens more than that, it's a habit. It's something that could have been preventable, right? Okay. Other excuses that we can sometimes give for not giving. Yeah. Yeah. Other things take a priority. Yeah, that's okay. Devil's advocate to that. Should those things be there? Was in order to go into debt, at some point we made those decisions. Was that coming above what should be number one on our list? Okay. Others. How about this? Maybe what are your reactions to some of the ones that I came up with? If you see anything up there that you want to comment on, just pick one and let's kind of break it down. So one of them I have is we don't have enough to spare. That idea of other things came first. Don't believe the place needs it, kind of along your lines of I don't like the items that maybe the church is spending on, or I think of it as a need. Does the church need it? Don't understand why to give, my lack of my why. Okay? Lack of planning, lack of marriage communications, and just straight up, I want more for myself. Any of these, I think, at some point probably run through our mind. That's the sinful side of us. And at some point, we always got to remember, as we go through this list, was God always number one on our mind? So again, let's keep that in mind as we continue on. So what is giving? So maybe just for a second, think to yourself, what would your definition of giving be? This in my class, this is one of those ones where I would say everyone should be able to have an answer to this because this one's opinion. This is not right or wrong. So what is your definition of giving? Okay. Where it comes from, the idea of first fruits. Okay. What else? Yeah. Okay. Giving of yourself, if that idea of everything that we have, including ourselves, belongs to God. How much are we giving back to Him? How much are we offering of ourselves and what He has given us to Him in that? When we talk about vocations, are we leaving all ministry work to those called workers? Or are we recognizing that whether you're a called worker or not, you are 100% belonging to your Savior? Okay? Other definitions. Okay, giving with the idea that this is I'm giving and expecting nothing in return. That's a hard one. That's a hard one, both in giving and in gifting. I think those sometimes go hand in hand as well. Yeah, not expecting something to come back or not reciprocating that. Granted, when it comes to giving with our Savior, who actually probably wins that back and forth? We definitely come out on top on whatever it is that we could ever possibly give. God has given us more. Other definitions. I'll take one more. This is a time when students start fretting. Oh no, he may call on me. Anyone? Go ahead. That's my daughter, by the way. She's trying to jump in. By the way, I have a tendency to sometimes go down rabbit holes. If we start going down a rabbit hole too much, feel comfortable enough to say, Schmeling, get back on track. Okay? But with that idea of thankful giving and cheerful giving, think of the last maybe 4 times you gave. How much thought did you give into that? I cognitively thought about my thankfulness to God, my praise in this gift, and in my donation, in my gift, in my giving. I would imagine it's probably less than 50%. I don't think that we normally take the time to think about our gift. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can maybe work around that, and I have that being one of the habits that we can change. But won't we talk about that now while we're on the topic? Without a show of hands, I would imagine there's a decent amount of people in here that are doing online giving. If that's happening, what would be a good practice to make sure that even while online giving is happening, I'm doing that? I'm thinking about the gift that I'm giving. Anyone have any of their opinions or their tips that they would give to making sure that I'm spending time to think about that gift that's going out? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, actually taking that time as you are sitting there thinking about that. And then again, at some point it's going to come back to our next slide is the why, by the way, so we're getting there. But again, thinking about why am I giving? Go ahead, PJ. Yeah. So before my joke is I am not a technology person. Most people used to thought like when I was the younger person on staff, they're like, oh, he must be good at technology. I am not. So I'm not a technology person. However, before you got to the idea of online giving, one of the practices that used to be encouraged when it came to giving is if you were going to write a check and give that to church, that you don't write the check on Sunday, that you write the check on Saturday night. What would a reason for doing that be? What? Yeah, because Sunday makes it more of a transaction. This is more of a bill. Saturday makes it more of this is something that I'm thinking about. This is taking it and actually putting time into it. And if it's Sunday morning, if you're anything like me or at my house, Sunday morning's a little chaotic. That as you're going to make your way to church, sitting down and writing a check, you might have actually gotten really good at writing checks in about 3 seconds. That when you sit down and you do it Saturday night, you actually can take your time and think about it. You actually might have a conversation with your spouse about it and be like, why this amount? Would we ever be able to increase this? Maybe you and your spouse have had the conversations of one of the two of you ever suggesting bringing that number down. That leads to a bigger conversation. Those conversations are missed in the 3-second Sunday morning signing. So now, if we're going to tie in online giving, what is something that we can do? Because now we've eliminated Sunday morning even 3 seconds. We've gone from 3 seconds to 0. So now what can we do? Any thoughts? Well, so, okay, I got to be careful on this too. Every week you shouldn't reevaluate how much you're giving. But that's part of the conversation. I think the bigger conversation is a remembering why. Why are we giving this? And I think, and maybe that's the transition into the next part. Oh. Okay, I'm off a slide. Okay, this is my definition of giving. Okay, so when it says, what is giving? And we were going through our definitions of giving. My definition is, it is the opportunities that God allows us to be part of ministry. God allows us to be part of ministry. So not, I have to give, but I get to give. When you think about who you are in the church, when you think of law and gospel, think about it in the beginning. Who are you? What are you? Starts with an S. You're a sinner. The idea that God would use us as sinners here on earth to grow his kingdom, to run his ministry here on earth. God allows us to be part of ministry. When we think of the idea of the church just wants my money, if we're thinking that way, we're on the first half. We have to give. When we think about it as God allows us to be part of ministry, now we get to give. Now we get to be part of that. God looks at me and he says, even though you're a sinner, I put my name on you, I've made you righteous, and I want you to be part of my church. And as we think of the different vocations that we were talking about today in church, when it comes to the body of Christ, we have called workers who are going to be your pastors and teachers, but they are not the most important people. They're important. Everyone's important. But the rest of the body is just as important. The lay workers are just as important. The rest of the body is so needed for things to happen. It is not just by the pastors or teachers. Yeah.
Another way to look at get to give is you get from God, so you give back God's community.
Yeah. And a community that we get to be part of. And again, when you think of even if it is transactional, back and forth relationship God gives to us, we're kind of just throwing pennies back at him, even when we think about what he's given to us. So again, when we think of that relationship back and forth, we are winning that every time. God gives us way more than we ever give back. Everything. All right? So here's the next part. Now think of ways that we give. Are there right and wrong ways to give? Let you think about that for a second. Check how are we doing with time. Okay. Wait, Pastor, what's my cutoff time? Okay, I don't have a school bell going off and having them rush off as I'm still talking as the bell happens. Okay. All right, so let's start with right ways to give. What are the right ways of giving? We're more talking of, maybe I'll just stop there. What are some right ways when it comes to giving? Yeah. Okay, cheerful is one. Give me another one. Yeah. Out of love? Okay, good. We're within your means? Okay, good. Intentional? Maybe I'm going to take the last two of those and combine them a little bit. Within your means, but what? Where on the ranking scale? First. Right? Within our means, the important part is God isn't looking at the dollar amount, but he is looking at where it falls on your priorities. If it's first and it's 50 cents, great. If it's dead last and it's $5,000, still not great. It's not the dollar amount in either direction. Hey, Peanut. So it's the fact that this is number one on our priority list. Okay? Let's reverse it. What are some wrong ways when it comes to giving? Maybe I'll give you a hint on this one. This was maybe a big one when the collection plate used to be passed. For show. Right? For other people. When it comes to me at Evergreen, and it comes to big gifts, and it comes to gifts that people want to put their names on, right away this starts with we have to have a conversation. Because if you're putting your name on this because you want to look really good, we got to take this a step back. By the way, there have been times in past where we've said no to gifts for people giving with the wrong heart. that is tough to do. But we want to make sure that when gifts are coming in, people are doing it with the right attitudes. That you're coming with and I'm not saying I'm judging that, but I think if someone's blatantly going to say, this is why we're doing this, I think we have to have a conversation. And most of the time in those situations, it didn't mean that they didn't give. It just meant that we had to have a couple conversations before we got to that point. But when it comes to our giving, the idea that God comes first and that I do not need to be part of it. The idea of my name does not need to be part of this. Now, that doesn't mean that names can't be part of those things either. Because I do believe that in some cases that can encourage other people to give as well. So there's a difference between encouraging and for show. So I think, and it's a fine line, but I think that part's also important. Yes? Exactly. And in that case, she wasn't giving for show. In fact, most people would say she probably is not going to show because of how little amount that actually was. But again, the part he was focusing on wasn't the dollar amount, it was the fact that she was doing it. And I think that's the encouragement that we always want to have, is the fact that we're doing it. Okay? One more wrong way when it comes to our giving. And we actually hit on this one already. The idea of making it transactional. The idea of eliminating the heart, eliminating even the possibility of knowing that you gave. If you've given online giving before, and let's say you went on vacation or something, and you didn't go to church, is there a possibility that you even forgot that you gave that week? So now that idea of now that's become transactional, it's still, and again, you're on a fine line because it's still good that you're giving. But the bad is that you had nothing to do with it. So that idea of remembering, and again, when you give, the idea is that you're remembering what God has given to you. That's the whole part that you want to be thinking about when it comes to our giving. That we're remembering and thinking about what God has given and done for us. So the next part that I have on this, so those first fruits, cheerful, for show, transactional, some good practices for giving. So we were talking about some of these habits, and I'll just put some of these up here right away. Okay? We already touched on one of them already, the idea of being intentional, the idea of planning, the idea of saying, I'm going to go through this, I'm going to go through my money, I'm going to go through my finances, I'm going to make a plan, and when I start, that's where I'm starting. I'm starting with my giving. And then we're going to go down from there. The next one that I have out there is starting young. This is, again, that idea where, this is one of those things about offering plates that I really liked, is that when the offering plate went by and you have the little kid dropping, and then you always hear that clink, 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 clink. You have the little kids dropping their pennies or their dimes or their quarters or whatever they have inside of the offering plate. We're starting young, and we're starting the idea of having them see the fact that we're giving. One of the negative things that I think about online giving, and this is something that maybe you need to think about within your families, when it comes to online giving, are we modeling for our kids how to give when it's online and they don't see it anymore? Doesn't mean that again, does not mean that it's wrong, but I think it means that there's one more step that we have to fill in a blank for. We have to show our kids and teach our kids why giving's right, and if they don't see us doing it, they don't know. So starting young and start talking and communicating. So the next part, teaching your kids. Having these conversations with your kids. I don't know about you individually, but talking about money and talking about finances can be a pretty intimate thing. It is very possible that as we scan the room, in fact, how about this? Show of hands, how many families did not talk about finances growing up? Okay, maybe I won't do a show of hands. This might not be an easy one. Might not be a good thing to go through. I will say, even between my wife and I, my wife, she will say money was never talked about in her family ever growing up. She could not even tell you ever how much her parents made, never how much when it came to giving, how to save, anything. Money was never talked about. I'm at least a step up from that. I mean, it's hard to go down from that at least, but I think when it came to money in my family, I think one of the only things that we really talked about was giving. I think giving was one of the only things that it came to. Well, pretty much, if I remember right from my parents, there was two things. Give and save. We never talked about spending, but giving and saving, there was no spending. All you did was save. So give and save. That was pretty much our financial talk. Okay? But think about how you were raised, whether it's good or bad. Now, if you're a parent, old kids, young kids, how would you teach? Would you teach it the same way? Would you teach it different? If you're parents who have kids that are older now, would you do it the same way you did it, or would you redo some things? Again, just things to think about as we go through the idea of practicing good habits. And the last one, communicate with your spouse. Holy smokes. The number one reason for divorce in the U.S. is money related. By the way, I also have to preface this. When it comes to this topic today, we're taking two things. We're taking giving, and we're taking the part we haven't even got to yet, the idea of personal finances inside the house. That's the other one. Between those two things, I spend at least 40 hours in class talking about these two topics. When asked to condense that to an hour, I squirmed a little bit. But the idea of communicate with your spouse, the idea of money in a marriage, we could talk about this for a long time. But now think about that with your spouse. Think about the idea of, does one do it all? Does the other have an active voice inside of it? Do both know how much money you actually have? Do you have one budget? Do you have a budget at all? All of those questions leads to, at some point when you are creating a budget, when you're creating plans of giving, when you're creating goals, at some point you have to have a conversation to make sure you're both, maybe I should say both, all maybe sounds a little bad, but the both of you are on track for the same thing that you both want. Because that could be leading to some arguments if one person wants to give this and one person wants to give this. If one person wants a lot more money going to retirement while another person wants a lot more money going to vacations now. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen to make sure that the decisions that you're making with your finances coincide with each other, or else it's going to lead to issues. Communication is the number one thing that needs to happen inside a family, inside of a marriage, in order to make sure that you're walking together and not walking apart. So another good practice, just communicating within, at least on a spouse-wise, but then communicating of how you want to teach when it comes to teaching kids starting young and different things after that. Okay? This idea of the ability to give. I think I want to make sure I read this the way that I wrote it. One of the things that I think we sinfully do is connect our giving to our ability to give. When we feel comfortable with our finances, then we can give. Whether you agree with that or not, I think that sometimes is a real factor for us. I think sometimes it does impact the way that people give. We just talked about it, it shouldn't. We should try to plan. We should put our giving first and have everything else follow. But I think realistically, that doesn't always happen. So, these are some of the reasons why we can understand some people maybe aren't giving. Right or wrong, these are real statistics. So when we look up at the first one, 50% of families have a budget and only half actually manage them. So in our country, in the U.S., 95% of people say that having a budget is extremely important. Yet only 25% of people actually have a budget. Okay? Then look at the next one. 75% of people could not afford a $500 emergency if it happened today. think of that number. Now, if you're thinking about that, that means that the majority of people, 70% of people that you interact with are in trouble. And if we know anything about peer pressure, the people that you hang out with are the people that you are going to emulate for yourself. Therefore, if you're going to hang out in that same realm, that puts you at a higher risk of being in that same situation. I always think this is an interesting statistic. Do you know that statistically, anyone who wins the lottery actually loses all of that money within 18 months? The part that I find even more interesting, so while someone wins the lottery, 18 months, they go into bankruptcy, so does their neighbor. I always find that statistic be so interesting, that the neighbor of the people who win the lottery, and the idea is keeping up with the Joneses, right? As you see so-and-so, your neighbor, the person that you hang out with, doing this, you want to do that at any expense. With lack of planning comes those kinds of things. So that's one of the things that I always think about is, who are you hanging out with? Who are the people that you're talking about with your finances? And are those people the people that you should be listening to? Without being so blunt, or maybe being so blunt. Would you take weight loss advice from someone who's overweight? Do we take financial advice from people who are not financially wise? And I think that's one of the things that we also want to be thinking about as we go through this. And then the last one, again, I thought this was an interesting statistic, that anyone between the ages of 40 and 60 have $33,000 in non-mortgage debt. By the way, I need to preface this. This is not like this is a presentation excluding this room. It's very possible that some of this is hitting home in a lot of us too. So this is not for those people, whoever are bad with finances out there. This is for all of us. This idea of, okay, how are we making our decisions, and where are we starting, and what are we doing? So now that we see some of these numbers, I think the whole idea was we understood the importance of why people need to have a plan. We just saw lack of budget leads to unable to pay for an emergency, which shows what happens in those emergencies. Now we're taking out debt. When we take out debt, it takes over money inside our budget. One of the things that I always talk about when it comes in my financial class is, think of debt like late work. Because when you go to school and you have late work, you're going to get new assignments. So now you have to do your new assignments and you have to do your late work. There's catching up to do. It's not so fun during that time. Well, now think of that financially. If you have debt and you're still trying to live your life, you now have to pay for things now and things from before. That adds stress. Those kids that are trying to do the makeup work, that's stressful until they finally get out of that. Guys, that's where we're at financially too. It's stressful when we are trying to do makeup work. So again, the idea, the understanding, the importance of what this is. So just so you know, this is Dave Ramsey's stepping stones for adults as far as what should be your order of importance when it comes to becoming financially solid. And just so I also explain this, I do not agree with everything Ramsey says. One of the reasons is because Ramsey had to make a class, a presentation for the majority of people. Why? Because the majority of people, 70% of people, need help. So there are individual things that I think we could pick apart and say, this one, maybe not so much. This one, maybe not so much. We could do some things this way. Maybe you have different opinions when it comes to credit cards. I do as well. But one of the biggest things that I teach about on the very first day of my class is that money changes with every person. People have different money personalities. Some people might be spenders. Some people might be savers. There's a number of different things that you need to determine for yourself what your right path is and what's wrong for you. Some people, credit cards are not their path because they know if I have a limit that's $50,000, I'm going to make it to $50,000 because that's a goal. I'm going to hit it. And then you have some people who have a limit of $50,000, they say, I'm not going to spend $5. So that idea of understanding your personality is key to all of this. So as we look at this up here, first one is a $1,000 emergency fund. Okay? Why is this important? Because if at some point I need to get myself out of debt, $1,000, I need to prevent myself from going into further debt. So I need to have $1,000 at least to be able to prevent that from happening. The next step you have is, okay, now we got to get out of debt. Okay, so now if I'm not going to allow myself to go into further debt, now we got to get ourselves out. Next one up there, 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. That's a lot of money. If you're spending $4,000 a month, you're now looking at $12,000 to $24,000 that you need to have. Now, that doesn't mean that you have that sit in your bank account. I could go into a long conversation about that as far as interest, having that in a bank account versus having it into something that's at least somewhat liquid. Personally, I would encourage a Roth account or something that you can take that out. But again, conversation for a later day. But something where you have that liquid, where you're able to take that money out, but able to go at it for 3 to 6 months. Anyone know why is 3 to 6 months a good number or a good range to try and be between? What does it allow? Maybe I'm going to have to look at the two guys that I had in my class on this one. 3 to 6 months. PJ, why 3 to 6 months? See, he answered it perfectly. Give you flexibility for sudden changes. And the reason he says changes, did you say changes? Okay, flexibility for different changes. He means that it also gives you the ability to make changes. Again, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but do you think there are hypothetical people out there that don't like their jobs? Why do people stay in jobs they don't like? Because they're paycheck to paycheck. And if they don't have the next job lined up, they're going to miss that paycheck. And if they can't afford a $500 emergency, well, that emergency is you don't have a job. More than likely, your expenses far exceed $500. So what does 3 to 6 months of emergency give you? It gives you the ability to leave something you hate. Or if it wasn't your choice, it gives you the ability to not fret if you lost your job right away. It gives you 3 to 6 months. So that idea of 3 to 6 months is the stress relief to different things coming up, potentially either foreseeable or unforeseeable in the future. Next part, 15% of investing. This is just an encourageable number for at some point if you're doing 15% going towards some kind of future for yourself then. Next one, kids' college funds. Pay off mortgage early, build wealth, and give. By the way, this is the big part to make sure that you understand when it comes to this. That doesn't mean that giving comes then. That's just when that's a focus to be able to give significantly more. Because Ramsey will say, same thing that we've been talking about, the very first thing when you're creating a budget is that giving is number one. Does anyone know what number two is? That actually might be, it's coming up. Okay? So this idea, this game plan, okay, it gives us something tangible to be working towards. Again, it doesn't mean that you're only going one at a time, but that now you have areas of focus as you're making your way through. Does anyone know what 80-20 represents? This is the key. 80-20, because when it comes to budgets and it comes to finances, people get nervous because I don't know if I know what I'm supposed to know. What's the biggest key, the 80% when it actually comes to growing and being confident in your money? Does anyone know what this 80-20 split might be? 80% is this, 20% is this. Got a guess? Okay. I like the idea. No, I mean that's not in this case, but I mean that's probably true. It actually would probably fit fairly close to that. But no, not in this case. Not in the key. Any other guesses? Okay. Yeah, so when it goes to budgeting at some point, and that's the next slide, is how we actually approach a budget. But yes, that part's very important where we know where every dollar is actually allocated to. In this case, 80-20, this is the part where we can actually take the stress relief off ourselves a little bit. When it comes to building confidence in your finances and building your finances, 80% is discipline. Well, 20% is knowledge. Finances does not take a lot of knowledge, but it takes a lot of discipline. Once you've determined your plan that I made my budget, now I'm going to stick to it, making the budget doesn't take as long as you think it does. Enacting the budget and carrying it out and having the discipline to stick to it, that's the big deal. So, that's the next part. Parts of a budget. So when you're thinking of creating a budget, there's a couple different areas you have to look at. And the first one is, if I have no income, I have no need for a budget. So the first part is my income. Where's my income? How much do I have coming in? My next one, giving. So this is the order of when it comes to actually making your budget. My income, how much do I have coming in? Next part, what am I giving from that? The next part from that, pay yourself. Pay yourself next before you pay all your bills. Saving. Put money into a savings account. Put money into something where you're saving for something that's related to you and your future. And then the last one is spending. So, income, giving, saving, spending. Okay? Types of a budget, and this is where you were talking about before. So there's so many different kinds of budgets that you can make out there, so many different models that you can follow. One of the basic ones that sometimes people start with is the 30-50-20. The idea that 30% goes towards wants, 20% goes towards saving, and 50% goes towards needs. Those can be adjusted here or there a little bit, but as a guideline, that might be one that you could follow. And if you ever even go into Google search and start typing out 30/50, it'll finish it for you. It knows where you're going. You can just click on that, and it can tell you or help you see of your spending which one goes into which category. But that's a simple place to start. The other one on the next side, the pay yourself first. This is actually another budgeting one, and this is for well, actually, maybe I'll ask. Does anyone know what pay yourself first budget actually looks like? This is an automated way. So what this does is right away, when you get your money come into your bank account, you automate pay yourself first. So money goes into your saving, goes into an account right away, separate from your other account, so that everything that's inside this account is okay to spend. Now, there's a caveat to that. That does not mean that you don't track your spending inside that category. It just means that you have the ability to spend that. And then the last one here is a zero-based budget. And that's when you itemize all these different categories that you have, and then you allocate, if I'm going to make $5,000 this month, then I have a budget that is going to category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all equal, if I add them up, equal that $5,000. So I know as money comes in that they auto-populate into a certain field that now I know how much I have to spend within that area. Okay? On the bottom here, and if you are ever looking at creating a budget, this is a very easy place to start. So at the bottom, it's www.foundationsu.com. And what that'll do is that'll take you to a place where you now have the choice between middle school, high school, and college. I actually would encourage, middle school or high school, or high school or college. Either one of those is good because that's where this comes from. This is actually a screenshot from the website. And so this is talking about a number of different things that can help you financially when it comes to creating a budgeting tool, showing how a mortgage calculator works, live podcasts and things through the radio calls, goal tracker, debt snowball, and investing calculator. All of these things, right when you click on that, this is what pops up. If you were to click on online budgeting tool, this is what pops up. I just threw a number in there. But that blank is empty, and you can just type in your income for a month. And it auto-populates everything down below. It's a pretty easy place to start, to at least get a starting point for you to say, let's change some numbers in here. This isn't accurate for us. This isn't accurate for us. But it might show you, maybe some places where you can understand if maybe what you're spending is maybe significantly higher than what, because there's some averages built into this. But you can kind of see where you fall on some of these things. So again, I just threw a number in there, and then underneath it goes from that. But where you see, it might be hard to see, but in front of all those words, there's a plus sign. If you click that button, it has a little drop down, and it explains all the different things that would go into that category. And then you can hit the button, and that'll go back up. Then you can click the next one. So it can help you know where your money's going to create that. And then I just threw on here a couple different budgeting tools that can help people in using and tracking their finances. So these are a couple apps that you can either have on your phone, on your computer, different things like that. So Mint, every dollar you need a budget. Those are ones that are part of the app system where you can just type those in. Those come up, and then you can put your numbers in, and they can, again, auto-populate for you some of those things. The next one, just using Excel. That might be another one that you can use just it might automate some things a little bit easier for you. Maybe you don't trust app systems and you just want to have it on your computer. That's okay too. I told you already, I am not a digital person. I use a notebook. I'm a pen and paper guy. I just my way. And then the envelope system. Again, this is Ramsey's way of saying no credit cards, everything's cash. When I have cash, I put it into the envelope based on the budget that I've created. And then when I want to spend something, I go to the envelope, I take the money out, and I spend it. If the amount isn't in the envelope, I don't buy it. And if I'm going to buy it, then I have to take money from some other category. But I can visually see that for me to do this means that I'm taking from something else. And there's an emotional side that says, I don't want to do that. It might actually rein in some of your spending a little bit. So that's another budgeting tool that kind of fits into that one too. And then again, just back to the idea of giving. This is the last thing that I wanted us maybe just to talk about when it comes to how do we maximize our gifts, or what are some tips to maximize some of our gifts? Well, I think the first one is taxes is a huge way that I think a lot of people don't understand. And I think sometimes there are ways that we can use these ways to continue our giving. Granted, again, go back to the initial part. We don't give because of taxes. But we have some abilities to use some of the opportunities that our government actually allows us to do that. Right. So, again, remember, give to Caesar's what's Caesar's. But if Caesar gives you a way to give to the church, know what those options are too. So, I put up there itemizing and standardized deductions, just knowing the differences between some of those. Maybe 2021, some people didn't realize some of the changes that happened with COVID that allowed some of the different changes. Okay? So knowing some of the differences within those, and the extension that even standardized deductions were allowed a deduction when it came to charitable giving this year. And that has not happened in the past. Required minimum distributions. If you're over 72 and you have an IRA, you are required to be pulling money out of those accounts at a percentage. I think it's typically 5% that at least needs to be pulled out of those accounts after the age of 72 a year. Okay? Some ways that you can do that. This is something to hear, because this can be really important. It matters how you take that money. If you take that money and have it given to you, put into your bank account, and you go to church and give, you're going to pay taxes on that money that you got. But if you tell the company that's holding your IRAs, give that money directly to church, then you don't pay any taxes on it. So knowing some of those differences can be a huge thing. By the way, I learned of someone who had given $100,000 to 4 places from their IRA the wrong way. I learned about it after. That hurt me a little bit, because they ended up paying a significant amount of taxes on trying to be charitable. So how we make some of those donations can be a huge, huge impact, which is why it's important to talk to people who have knowledge in some of these things. And then the last one is just company matches. I think sometimes when you're working for, even with like Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, Bank of America, there's a handful of companies that allow you to be charitable. And not only allow you to, but match what you're giving. Some places either 1-to-1 up to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. So if you right now are giving $5,000 and you have a company match, that's $10,000 now going to your church. All because you didn't know. In fact, that's one of the things that at Evergreen we just added on our website is we now partnered with a company that says as people are making a donation, they can type in and see if their company does any matching. So it can show up right away, oh, my company does matching. I didn't even realize that. And then right there, you can click on it and it'll go to that company's form of how to get the matching funds. Again, making that accessible for people to be able to see there are options out there. So I think in the end that the idea is we are looking at a number of ways on how we can feel better or more confident and comfortable in how we give and feel more knowledgeable in some of those things. But let's not lose sight of the beginning part. We give because God gave to us. We give because God gave us more than we could ever give back. We give because God allows us to be part of ministry, and this is important. This is our calling. Whether you're a pastor or a teacher, this is your vocation. As a person and a body and a piece of the church, this is all of our job as we're here on this earth is to spread the gospel. And God allows us to be part of that. And that's a pretty cool thing. Thank you. That's all I have for today. Are there any questions or anything that I can help with or answer with? I tell you, I took 40 hours and tried to put it into one. Hopefully you got something from it. If nothing else, maybe you were at least on a surface level reminded of some things that either you used to practice or maybe you should be practicing a little bit better or doing a little bit differently. But in the end, this is kind of some of the different things that our class goes through as we talk about at school. So I enjoy doing it. So thanks for allowing me to come and share this with you today too. Thanks, Pastor.